Good to see you today. We've got a lot of visitors here today, and we're so glad you're here. We're having pizza for lunch. We want you to stay, and visitors go first. So there you go. We're going to go and have a good time just having some pizza, some bunch of salad, desserts back there. I don't know what all Melissa's got back there, but it'll be good, I promise you. It was not long ago that I gave you a message about Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, and I introduced you to Jericho. Now, this little family church here really likes history, and so y'all like that kind of background. Well, I'm going to go a little deeper into Jericho today, about 1,000 years or so later than what we did the first time. Jericho is a city right now of about 17,000 people, and that's as many as it can hold. That's as big as it's ever been. Jesus would have been to Jericho many, 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 many times. How do I know that? Well, because to get from Galilee, which is 66 miles from Jericho, you would go to Jericho in order to go to Jerusalem. Now, he went as a good Jew. Jewish people made a pilgrimage to Jerusalem 3 times a year for festivals and for holy days. So Jesus, growing up and as an adult, would have many times, 80, 90 times, have walked from Galilee to Jericho, from Jericho to Jerusalem. So he would have known this path extremely well. Now, you think it's hot here today. The high temperature in Jericho today is going to be 109 degrees. Now, they only got 11% humidity, so that's a trade-off, and it does cool off every evening. Gets as low sometimes there as 45, 50 degrees. A little hotter now than it was when Jesus was alive because there's less forest, less vegetation than there was 2,000 years ago. Nonetheless, it has not changed just a whole lot since Jesus' day. Now, when you got to Jericho and you wanted to go to Jerusalem, you had a 17-mile walk. Jericho is 900 feet below sea level. You think New Orleans is low. Jericho's 900 feet below sea level. So to get to Jerusalem, you have a 3,700-foot ascent across 17 miles. That is a very, very difficult walk. For young people visiting today, to get from Jericho to Jerusalem is about an 8-hour, 9-hour walk, and it's hard. It's hot, and it's sweaty. Now, there's been people, and by the way, now you might understand. Do you remember the story of Jesus when he's 12 years old and they go to the temple and they leave Jesus in Jerusalem? You know, great parenting right there. But it's a lot like a lot of us grew up. You know, my parents, I left home when the sun came up and came home at nighttime. Nobody knew where I was. There was no cell phones. I went and did what I wanted to do. Well, back then you didn't worry too much, so Jesus stayed at the temple 3 days, but I want you to know what they went through. Have you ever got frustrated looking for your kids? Or maybe you're in Brookshire's and your kid's missing and you can't find them and you panic, but you know, you find them within a few minutes. Well, they get away from Jerusalem and it's a three days Jesus is by himself. And it dawns on them, where's Jesus? So they got to go back. Now, here's how they got to go back. They would have walked. Now, it's 3 days he's been there, so a day and a half. They've gone from Jerusalem to Jericho, 3,700-foot drop. That's a nice walk now. They've started back toward over to Galilee, about 20 miles, and they go, whoops. Now they got to walk back to Jericho and back up that 3,700-foot climb 17 miles. Now you understand a little bit more what was going on when they lost Jesus, right? Now, Jericho at Jesus' time has been inhabited for at least 9,000 years. Get a handle on that. Probably closer to 10. There's been people in Jericho 10,000 years when Jesus goes through there. It's a different kind of a place. It's a place where priests resided. The priests of the temple. Now, priests were all over the Holy Lands, but there was one cluster of priests at Jericho. And half of them would go minister in the temple because it took hundreds of them. And the other half of them would provide provisions getting ready to go back and they'd swap out. Bunches of priests at Jericho. Now you might understand the story of the Good Samaritan. Y'all remember the Good Samaritan? Guy gets beat up, left bloodied and beat up to die on the side of the road. And 2 people come by and just walk right past him. One of them was what? A priest. These people would have known exactly what Jesus is talking about because every one of them walking from Jericho to Jerusalem or vice versa would have seen priests all up and down that road. So that story really made a lot of sense to them. Now, Jericho is a place where if you went today, somewhere between December and April, when it's the ripening season for all the fruit and flowers, and the flowers are always blooming, you'd be almost overwhelmed by the aroma, because you've got lemons and limes and citrus fruit that we're not aware of, tangerines, and the whole valley, the whole Jericho Valley is just full of that aroma. And there's flowers, exotic flowers, all over the place. And so the smell would be almost like walking into a florist today that happens to have an entire cart or 3 or 4 of citrus fruit. They also have the Jericho Rose. You can order one if you want to. The Jericho Rose is called the Resurrection Rose because it dries up like a tumbleweed, and it can go without liquids. Some say that as many as 50 years, but certainly 7 or 8 years. 98% of its water gone, and you can water that thing and it comes right back, the Resurrection Rose. It's also at Jericho that most think that Jesus, on top of a mount right there that you can still go see, was tempted by Satan. How many of you like movies? You seen the movies of Antony and Cleopatra? You know the Cleopatra movies, you like those? Did you know that Cleopatra once owned Jericho? She did. Cleopatra was there when Julius Caesar was killed. She got into all sorts of political stuff, a great political leader. She looked nothing like Elizabeth Taylor. Evidently, she wasn't very attractive, but she had a great personality. And Mark Antony wanted to honor her, and he gave her that region ending at Jericho. So she wanted that, by the way, and here's why. Because Jericho at that time had persimmon trees, which were basically a balsam tree, and it had fiber in it, and it had resin in it that made a perfume that was said that no man could resist it. It would drive a man crazy, and she wanted that stuff. Mark Antony gave her that place. Well, she eventually got in cahoots with a guy named Herod the Great, and Herod the Great leased it from her. Got mad at her because she took sprigs of the persimmon trees back to Egypt, and he planned to assassinate her, so she left. But she leased that place to Herod the Great, who had a palace there, and it's Herod the Great that you'll remember, when Jesus was born, he ordered all the infants in all the Holy Lands to be killed because he wanted to destroy the Messiah. It's amazing how history comes together, isn't it? And so you've got all of that going on, but this is a rich little place. This is like, you think of the places you'd want to travel now, some exotic places in the United States you might want to go see where rich folks like to go. So it'd be a great place to be a beggar. Be a wonderful place to sit outside the city gates because you got wealthy folks coming in and out of there. That's why blind Bartimaeus. Y'all taught that story in Bible school, any of you? That's Luke chapter 18. Blind Bartimaeus is outside of Jericho when Jesus comes, and he wants to know what all the ruckus is because he can't see nothing. And they say, well, Jesus, the Son of God's coming. He starts to hollering, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And they're saying, shh, shh, be quiet. They can't shut him up, and Jesus heals him. It's a wonderful, wonderful place to heal somebody and work God's miracles and let people see God and let those priests see what the glory of God really does. Now, there's a fountain. There's a spring in Jericho that's always been there. It was there at Jesus' day, and it's there now. And I'm going to bet Davis just put a picture of it. Today, we call it Elisha's spring. In 2 Kings chapter 2, people come to Elisha and they say, hey, this valley's got land, but it's horrible land and the water is foul. So Elisha goes and heals the water. Now, the water was there before that, but something had gone wrong with it. It had been fouled. Elisha heals the water, and then he says it'll always be clean from now on. Well, guess what? It still is. That fountain right there comes from Elisha's spring. That's where he threw the salt in the water. And that fertilizes, that irrigates the entire Jericho Valley. That's why they've got dates, oranges, all the things. It's in the middle of the desert. It's an oasis. And it's always been fed by that spring right there. Now that brings us to Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through 10, and the story of Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was a tax collector. Now, who was that? Well, the Roman government didn't really want to fool with tax collectors, but they wanted money. So what they do is they let rich people bid for provinces. And if you were the highest bidder, you got a province. Now, if you got that province, you went and hired tax collectors among their own people to basically rob them, and the people that leased the province get the money, and the tax collector gets anything above what the leasee wanted. And so Zacchaeus was a tax collector. Now, they would tax people 30, 40, sometimes 50%. While they'd catch you coming into town, they'd say, "Hey, Daryl, what you hauling?" "Well, I got some cantaloupe right here." "That's super. I want 40% of those cantaloupes. I want 40% of what they're worth." Now, Daryl would go into town and sell his cantaloupes, and on the way back out, he'd say, "Hey, Daryl, did you have a good day?" "Good. I want 40% of the money that you made today." That's the kind of stuff they do. I mean, they could catch you coming, going. They'd hit you every way you could possibly think of. Now, folks, when you paid your taxes, this isn't America. You don't get Social Security out of these taxes. You might benefit from the infrastructure when they build a Roman road, but they're not doing anything for you. Basically, you are paying your oppressors to oppress you. You think taxes are rough now, you ain't seen nothing. It was horrible. Now, if you got to the tax collector and he could catch you anywhere he wanted to, and multiple ones could catch you, and you didn't have the money to pay them, they'd give you a loan. Guess what the interest looked like? It's like one of these credit cards. When it hits 29%, you ain't never going to pay that off. They're going to eat you up till the day you die. They would hit you with interest. Now, here's the other thing. You can't go to a judge. You can't go to a judge and say, "Hey, judge, Zacchaeus ripping me off down there. He hit me coming in with my cantaloupe, hit me going out with my money. I hate Zacchaeus. You got to do something about this." Judges are going to do nothing, because guess where their salary comes from? Taxes. Zacchaeus is a tax collector. Tax collectors were thought of worse than murderers, worse than robbers. Now, he's a Jew, and he's considered, here's how serious this is. Tax collectors couldn't go to a synagogue. If you were a tax collector in this day and time, you couldn't go to church. They caught you at the door and say, "No way." If you're a tax collector, you could not go to the temple for Passover. If you are a tax collector, your family considered you dead. You were dead to your family. Now, I want to tell you something you need to know. Zacchaeus' name means pure. You could translate it righteous. You see, his mama named him pure. You mamas remember having your babies? She looked at that little baby and she thought, "What am I going to name him?" "Well, I think I'll name him Pure." And she had dreams. She had dreams of him being successful and him making a good life. Maybe since she named him Pure and Righteous, she may have been thinking, maybe Zacchaeus will be a priest. Maybe Zacchaeus will do something around the temple. Maybe Zacchaeus will serve people. And he became a tax collector. They hated him so badly, and they were rich, by the way, filthy rich. But the Jews hated him so badly that the rabbis actually taught it's okay to lie to a tax collector. So here comes Daryl with his 140 melons. How many melons you got there? 72. And that's all right, man. You didn't get in any trouble for that. You could lie to the tax collectors all you want. How much money you got in your pocket? And you got $400, 50 cents. Rabbis didn't have a problem with that. They were absolute social outcasts. They were absolute political traitors. They were absolute religiously excommunicated. Now, I want you to really get this, folks, how deep this goes. The rabbis debated whether or not a tax collector could even be forgiven. This was the unpardonable sin. Most believe they can never repent, they can never change, there's nothing they can do to be redeemed. And the only people that would hang out with a tax collector were the worst people in town, or people that just liked the food and the wine, and so would hang out of them to use them for their money. But they only got to hang out with the worst of the worst. So here's Zacchaeus, and he's a little old guy. I don't know how little he is, but he must be a little guy. We sing Wee Little Man. So he's this little guy, and he really wants to see Jesus. Well, he can't see over people. He can't see through people. He can't get up and, he's got to do something. So Zacchaeus loses his dignity. Rich people don't climb trees. But Zacchaeus climbs a sycamore fig. Put a picture up there, didn't he? That's good timing right there, boy. I mean, Davis is good. Zacchaeus climbs a sycamore tree. Now, it might interest you, that's called the Zacchaeus tree. That tree right there is over 2,000 years old in the middle of Jericho. That tree was there when this happened. Now, is that the tree that Zacchaeus climbed? Doubt it. Might not have been big enough back then. Maybe so. But what you do need to know is there's another tree there that's behind glass that they actually claim. It's just a stump that they claim was the Zacchaeus tree. But this one's called the Zacchaeus tree, and it would have certainly been there when Jesus walked through town. So, the Zacchaeus tree. Sometimes, folks, the best place you can ever be is up a tree. When I was a little boy, my friend George back there that's visiting today lived around Corpus Christi. When I was a little boy, I lived in Corpus Christi. I was 5 years old when we left, and I was a monkey, man. One day I decided to climb a great big tree. Now, in Corpus, they have these streets that it's a street over here and a street over here, and in the middle is kind of like green park kind of area, just a lot that's open, and you play in there. I guess that's supposed to be good looking or something. And there was this giant tree. So I climbed that son of a gun. I did some of it bear hugging, going up and crawling. Some of it I'd hold on and crawl up like Mowgli in the Jungle Book. Man, I was Tom Sawyer when I was a little kid. And I got way up in that tree. And I realized coming down wasn't going to be nearly so easy. And I'm 5 years old, man. I'm way up there. And so I'm hollering, Mama! I'm hollering, man. I bet I hollered for 30 minutes. And finally she came out and she looked at me and said, how did you get up there? You ever thought about the stupid questions we ask our kids? You know, if I had been me now, I would have said, well, this giant came by and dropped a bean underneath me, and this tree just grew up between my legs, and here I am. I climbed up here, Mama. Well, get down. Well, I got as where I could, and she finally got a man to get a ladder and come get me down. But you know what? It taught me, don't get yourself in stuff you can't get out of, and sometimes you got to let somebody help you. Sometimes, folks, in life, the best place you can find yourself is up a tree. When you've put yourself in a position you can't get out of, when you've done it too much financially, when you've buried your marriage, when you've hurt your kids, when you've been away from God too long, up a tree ain't so bad, because up there you might just see Jesus. And the question that Zacchaeus begs of us is this: how bad do you want to see Jesus? How much do you want to see him? Maybe Zacchaeus had the Napoleon syndrome. You know what that is? Little man syndrome. Maybe that's what he had. Maybe all of his life old Zacchaeus got teased because he's a little bitty guy. Maybe they wouldn't pick him. Maybe he was always last for the sports teams. Maybe nobody ever chose him. Maybe the girls rejected him. And maybe somewhere in Zacchaeus' heart he said, I'm going to get these rascals back. And maybe every time a bully walked through town, he just taxed them totally. Maybe he was just getting retribution on everybody he could for being little. But whatever it was, on the inside, Zacchaeus was empty. And he was full of pain. And he heard about Jesus, and he wanted to see him. But more importantly, Jesus saw him. And Jesus looked and said, Zacchaeus, get out of the tree right now. I'm going to your house to eat. Boy, oh boy, there's times I wish I could be Jesus, and that's one of them. Because I would have loved to have said, Zacchaeus, I'm going to eat at your house today, and I would have looked right at one of those priests and winked. And I'm telling you, when he says, I'm going to eat at your house today, everybody around said, whoa! He's not going to a sinner's house. He's going to the sinner's house. Holy smokes! This guy, he's worse than a prostitute. He's worse than a rapist. He's worse than a drunk. He's worse than a thief on the cross. And Jesus goes and eats with him. And here's what Zacchaeus does after meeting Jesus. I'm going to give half of everything I got to the poor. He's a rich man. And if I've wronged anybody, he's robbed everybody there. If I've robbed anybody, I'm going to give them 4 times what I've given them. Here's what Zacchaeus just did. He gave away everything he has. He's robbed everybody around. I'm giving half to the poor, 4 times what I owe anybody. He's emptying his vault. He has learned that Jesus is worth everything he got. Jesus is worth emptying everything, to give him all. That's what Zacchaeus is doing. And Jesus says, Zacchaeus, today salvation has come to your house because you are a son of Abraham. That would have been hard for some of them to hear because they think he's been excommunicated. You're a son of Abraham, and I'm going to tell you today, if you're God's son or you're God's daughter, you will always be God's son and daughter. You cannot unson you. You cannot undaughter you. And Jesus said, salvation has come today. And the key to the story is Luke chapter 19, verse 10, when Jesus says, for the Son of Man came to seek the lost. I came to find the lost. That's why I came. That's why in Luke chapter 15 it says, the sinners and the tax collectors were attracted to Jesus because he's seeking the lost. Let me ask you a question. Who's attracted to us? Who's attracted to us? And I want to challenge us for a moment. Folks, we spent so much time as people and in our history in the epistles, from Acts to Revelation, and that's good. We need to study the whole Bible. But we've lived in the epistles. What's the rules? What's the norms? What's the patterns? What do you do? How do you do this? How do you fix that? How do you answer that? Who can come? Who can't come? And when all you do is live in the epistles, the natural tendency is start making it about you. And it ain't about you. I want you to hear me. The epistles follow the Gospels. And until you have internalized and swallowed the Gospels, the epistles are never going to make sense. Until you can learn the words of Jesus, 2 things matter: love God and love people. And I want to challenge every one of us to read the Gospels through 3 times. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Read them 3 times. It won't take you long. Some of you are reading romance novels. Just put it down and read this. It'll take you the same amount of time. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John, and all of a sudden the Spirit will lighten your heart to what the epistles really meant. Spend time in the Gospels. Zacchaeus just wanted to see somebody that was different. And the world right now needs to see people who are different, that attract them, because we are the continuation of the ministry of Jesus. And Jesus never closed the doors, He blew them open. And we are to be people that are open to others, not closed to others. We are to be those that practice inclusion with others, that come to those that have been rejected and hated and turned away. And Zacchaeus was looking for Jesus, but here's what's more important. Jesus was looking for Zacchaeus. Who are we looking for? Who are we chasing down? Who are we wanting? Who are we reaching to? And I want you to hear the last thing. I read an article that said, I wonder what Zacchaeus saw when he looked in Jesus' eyes. I think I can tell you. When Zacchaeus looked in the eyes of Jesus, he saw who he was intended to be. And for the first time in his life, his name was pure. He finally found his destiny with Jesus. Let's listen to this before Ray closes us.
Well, God moves in mysterious ways. That's an old religious song written by William Cowper. Do any of you remember when each night when television would close down and there would be a sign-off and we always played the Star-Spangled Banner? How many, raise your hand if you've seen that? Well, when I was preaching at Broadway in Lubbock in the 70s, I got a call from Whites Ferry Road Church in Louisiana. They had a dream, and their dream was that with that Star Spangled Banner, we would also have a 1-minute devotional to reach the sinners. They called me in Lubbock to come and do that. 1-minute sermons, they called it. I'd fly out every 3 months and do 13 tapes for them. It wasn't easy. But we had a tremendous response to that. Hundreds and hundreds of letters. They found out people were hurting at midnight. They were seeking, they were praying, they were looking. I remember one of the letters. A man wrote it. He said, I've been married to my wife for 16 years. She told me today that she didn't want to live with me anymore. And they got a divorce. 20 years later, she called him and said, will you come home? Said, I'm dying with cancer. And he went home. And he took care of her for the next 5 years before she died. I will never forget that funeral in Dallas, Texas. God moves in mysterious ways. He did with Zacchaeus, and he will with us. Father, thank you for this powerful, powerful message. Thank you for Jesus. Thank you for our mission that we have for Jesus. And Father, thank you for the food that we have today, and help us as one go celebrate together. In Jesus' name, amen.